All right, the terminology that we have for the design process are as follows. So I start with this concept of oppressive design. This is rooted in the understanding that there are certain ways of designing that actually create stress, they create problems, they create an oppression upon the client. And this is, you can use oppressive language, you can use oppressive different things, but when I'm talking about oppressive design, I mean a design that is created in such a way that your client feels not knowledgeable, they feel inferior, they feel unable to meet your demands or your timeline, or they're stressed by a fixed and rigid timeline. Remember, permaculture is about ecological observation based design, and in nature there are no like super rigid structures. There's a flow and a balance, and so your design as it's created needs to meet the needs of the client, which often are flexibility and ability for the design to grow and evolve over time. And so when I say oppressive designs, this is when we're working with these really big, super structured, super rigid master plans that take huge amounts of time, huge amounts of money to create something that actually is a weight upon the shoulders of the client for the long term. The next term is master plan or master design. This is often what you see when if you Google permaculture design and you see these fancy images with the logo and the scale bar and the name of the client, and then this massive list of all the different trees and plants. You have these big detailed images with all the plants that are actually placed to scale. You have all the images, you have the swales that are listed on site, that are located on site. You have the ponds that are located on site. All of this requiring, a huge amount of hours for counting the trees, huge amount of hours for finding suppliers, for finding estimates, estimating labor costs, mapping the contours and locating them on site, mapping and measuring the potential for dam construction, all of these different things. So master plan is really a comprehensive, detailed design, or a master design that used to be kind of the main offering of a permaculture designer, was that they get to that master plan phase. We've adapted and evolved many designers, not all of them, to a more growth-based, evolutionary-based, progressive design process, where we start with a concept and we allow it to grow with the needs of the client and the needs of the land as that design progresses. So the next term is machine hours. So the machine hours are specifically referring to whether it's a movement of a tractor, movement of an excavator, movement of a backhoe, or any other machine that you have on property. Those are machine hours, right? So you may have a certain amount of design hours, you may have a certain amount of observation hours, you may have a certain amount of machine hours. The next term is progressive, and when we mean progressive, what we mean is a plan or a design, because we're often referring to a progressive concept plan. This is something that grows over time, and so we have the overall plan, we have everything decided in general. This is an area that the food forest can be in. This is an area where we want erosion management, maybe with a water harvesting dam, maybe with a swale, right? You're a little bit more loose in all of this, and over time, when we say, okay, now it's time to enter into the water management phase, we'll do more detail. So you're progressing the detailed design elements as they come to a term or a time when the client is ready to implement them. The next term is the evolutionary design, and it's really the same, interchangeable in a way as the progressive design. We are continually evaluating how the phase that was implemented in detail, or designed in detail and implemented, worked out, to then adapt the next detailed design element. So if we did, a quarter acre food forest, or a 10 acre or 1,000 acre, no, you wouldn't start with 1,000 acre, but a small amount of food forest, the next iteration of food forest that's planted, we learn from what we planted. What worked, what didn't work? Was it too many trees? Was it not enough? Do we have enough mulch? Was the calculations right? All of this stuff, you're going to have mistakes, and that's fine, and you're going to grow and learn from them. So we do an evolutionary design process where we continually learn, evaluate, and adapt new learning to the next design phase. The next term is the concept plan, and this is really after the observation phase. We do a concept plan, which is a preliminary design. This is a early stage suggestion. Like I said, with the areas, we think this area is good for food foresting. We think this area is good for passive solar building. We think these areas here have erosion risk and need to have some erosion management strategies. But you notice how we're not saying you're planting oak trees here and walnuts here and apples here, because at this stage we actually haven't gone and done detailed analysis of the soil for each location. We're not going in to do detailed analysis of, are walnuts able to grow in this soil with this rainfall, with this hardiness zone, right? All of that is a detailed design process. So once the client or partner agrees that, yes, I like the food forest idea, what can we grow now? Then once it's approved and we are agreeing that we want more nut-based or more wildlife-based foods or more berries, we can then decide on the focus of the food forest and begin designing specifically. So in a concept plan, we're proposing loose design elements that don't require a huge amount of time and invested energy into placement, because we know that in the review of the concept plan, the client or partner will actually say, you know what, I want double that food forest, or I don't want any food forest at all, or I don't want any water management or ponds or whatnot, or maybe I want way more than you've suggested. So the concept phase needs to be very loose, and don't put a huge amount of energy and labor into the first iteration, because you're going to have that review and adaptation to the critiques and comments of the client. The next is the detailed design. So the detailed design is what we call the master plan or the master design. This is really that absolute detailed list of all these different elements, and we're going through, there's lists of what's needed in a detailed design process, and it's quite demanding. It's a huge amount of work to complete one of these. The next term is baseline photos. And when I say baseline data, baseline measurements, baseline photos, these are what we use them as a benchmark. So a benchmark meaning a measured point that we can then reference to. So a baseline measurement, let's say we're using the Brix reading, which is a measurement of sugars in our foods. We're going to measure the sugars in our carrots and our tomatoes and our apples. Then we're going to begin soil remediation techniques, so that next year when we measure our Brix reading, we have a comparison to see if the sugars went up, which is what we're expecting, because we've increased the life of the soil, which increases nutrient availability, which increases sugar production, and therefore we are hoping to have an increase in Brix reading. But how do we know if we have an increase if we didn't take those baseline measurements? So baseline photos are exactly the same thing. We're taking photos of the before so that we have an exact example to begin with, and then we can see later on what it looks like and how much it has changed. Trust me, if you are in the project day to day, the changes happen gradually, and you'll have someone come back and visit that hadn't seen it in 2-3 months or 2 years, and they're just blown away with the difference since the last time they saw it. So make those baseline measurements, make those baseline calculations and photographs and videos, and that's going to help you in the long term of the growth of your project. When we say that permaculture is a design science or a system of design, it is that. It is a process where we observe nature, we take the observation of information, we then analyze what is it telling us, so what is the information that's coming out of it, and how do we use that to solve problems that are there, because problems are indications of a lack of need, right? Much like in nonviolent communication. So we look at that and we design. So this systems process is observation, analysis, and then we look at the actual detailed design and then the management of those, right? So we have all of these phases of the design process, and that is the system of design in permaculture.